Sound Cartel.
How do you protect your business's value when costs keep rising and uncertainty shows no sign of easing? In today's episode, author and managing director of Exit Advisory Group, Simon Bedard, explains how rising costs, inflation and economic uncertainty are reshaping business value. Simon also unpacks why many business owners are absorbing costs instead of passing them on, and he shares where to focus to build a stronger, more resilient business. Then, senior psychologist Rhonda Andrews from Barrington Centre explores why psychological safety is far more than a compliance issue. Rhonda explains how creating a workplace where people feel safe to speak up can improve performance, innovation and retention. And she shares why doing nothing is now the biggest risk of all. From Sound Cartel, I'm Grace Jennings-Edquist, and this is Business Essentials. Simon Bedard has a simple way of describing today's economy. He says business owners are like small boats in a very big ocean. While we can't control the size of the waves, we can decide how well prepared we are when they arrive. As managing director of Exit Advisory Group and author of new book Exit Like an Expert, Simon works with business owners to strengthen the value and resilience of their businesses, regardless of the economic conditions. So how do rising costs and economic uncertainty change what a business is really worth? Simon explains to Nicole Goodman why buyers look at businesses differently when conditions become tougher.
So if you think about value, most companies get valued by taking some kind of net profit and multiplying it by a number, and we land at an equation. So if we think about profit being a huge part of that valuation calculation, rising costs and things like that have a massive impact. I'm engaging with various different industry bodies and different people in government at state and federal level to talk about small business and the impacts that are going on at the moment, because there's this perception that businesses just put their prices up and, it's the poor consumer who suffers. Whereas the evidence that I see is very different to that. Most small businesses are under enormous pressure to absorb cost increases and pricing increases. I think corporates are very good at being able to pass that on and message that. But to be frank, even large companies who use smaller businesses as suppliers squeeze those smaller companies to absorb cost increases. Small businesses are typically slower and reticent to pass on those cost increases to their customers. In fact, it's a conversation I'm having across the country at the moment, is business owners saying we are trying to work out how and when to try to pass on some of these cost increases because we've been absorbing them for years. And it's at a point where it's going to break us. And so, high inflation environments that we've been trading in for some time now are having a very direct impact on value. Higher costs, lower profit, smaller value. But there are other impacts too. A lot of geopolitical sort of turmoil. The US has been kind of an interesting case for most people watching it over the last few years. Throw in a little Gulf War and a few oil crises along the way, maybe the odd pandemic. This is not a simple environment to work in. And so not only is that impacting the way people work and run their business and the kind of profits they might get out of it, it's impacting the perception around the economy, around risk factors. And that perception impacts the other half of this value equation. So, the more people see risk, the less they're willing to pay. That's just a fundamental truth. So we're constantly talking about things like interest rates in the media. But beyond the fact that it might impact mortgages, because let's be honest, that actually only impacts a third of the economy. It's actually quite a blunt instrument. What it actually is a proxy for is sentiment, right? Mm-hmm. People talk about interest rates. Everyone goes, interest rates are going up. And it has this knock-on effect to behaviour, which is what I just take my hat off to business owners. They have to deal with so much uncertainty, and they're also dealing with ridiculous levels of bureaucracy in this country. We are massively over-regulated. Business owners already are collecting all of the taxes and GST for the government. They recently have just made changes to the anti-money laundering laws, where now it's apparently up to small businesses to completely vet everybody and determine that they're not in some way some kind of criminal mastermind because, of course, business owners have all the resources and facilities to be now a spy agency. And just to put the kind of final boot into small business owners, The federal government's decided recently to make changes to capital gains and all the various other things. And look, don't get me wrong, I think it's actually important that the federal government, it's their job to make policy around taxation. But the impacts that business owners are going to feel down the track, I don't think they've necessarily been represented as clearly as they could be. And so, here we are again, current environment, things going on, there's all these variables, and all of it is impacting people's perception around value as well as the hard dollars that actually land in their bank account.
Yeah. What kind of businesses tend to hold their value best when conditions get tougher, do you think?
Well, it sort of comes a little bit back to this idea of risk and volatility, right? I get a lot of investors come to me, private equity firms, family offices, you name it. And one of the most common expressions I hear from investors is, we would like to buy a nice, boring business that just consistently makes money. Give me some boring thing. Oh, a cleaning business. We sell cleaning products. Everybody needs to clean their house and their business, rah, rah, rah. In a downturn, people don't stop cleaning, right? So it's things that can be, I guess, less impacted by either the policy decisions we just spoke about, those macro and economic environmental things that tend to throw us around a little bit. We're all small boats in a big ocean, right? And so when that big macroeconomic ocean moves, that big wave, we're all getting thrown around. So I guess investors look for the kind of businesses that can ride through some of those storms. And, you're always going to have ups and downs, but it's just the scale of those ups and downs that are going to determine the risk factors. And then, of course, the ongoing profitability and predictability of that business.
As you said, a lot of small businesses are feeling a lot of pressure. The boats are moving up and down, the tidal waves are hitting. For owners feeling the pressure now, what should they focus on first? Is it around cutting costs, protecting margin, strengthening systems, or is it something else?
Yeah, and the short answer is, of course, that it depends, because every business is a bit different and what they do is different. And I do think the first thing to recognise is that you're not alone. And I think a lot of business owners feel that sense of isolation. It's stressful, right? You're juggling so many variables. And then often it's that one little thing that goes wrong in the business. It's the straw that broke the camel's back, right? It's that one last thing that went wrong that's driving you nuts. I think the first is to recognize that you are not alone. There are lots of people around you going through similar things. And so if you're feeling isolated, you need to find your people. And that might be through networking groups. It might be through industry bodies. It might be your next door neighbor's business, I also think it's about getting perspective. So, this is where I think good advisors earn their money. Is business owners usually have a task list as long as your arm, right? But if you've got 50 priorities, you actually have no priorities. So out of the 50 things you could be doing, how do we work out the 2 or 3 that are going to move the needle the most? And I just find most business owners might be able to articulate some of this stuff, but it's the perspective that helps you prioritize it, put it on the timeline and give it the focus it needs.
That was Simon Bedard, Managing Director of Exit Advisory Group.
If you're building a business, your reputation is everything, and a podcast can help build trust at scale and turn your expertise into authority. Sound Cartel's new Thought Leader package is designed for business owners who want impact without the overwhelm. So we handle the strategy, production and launch, while you can stay focused on what you do best. You can book your free 20-minute strategy call at soundcartel.com.au.
Now we turn to psychological safety at work. What does it actually look like, and why should every business leader care? In this conversation, Senior Psychologist and Managing Director of Barrington Centre, Rhonda Andrews, explains why psychologically safe workplaces drive stronger performance, innovation and staff retention. Rhonda also busts some common myths, outlines practical ways to build trust and open communication, and shares some simple daily habits that can help teams feel supported, speak up confidently and perform at their best. She begins by telling me what psychological safety actually means in a business context.
It really is saying that business owners now are accountable for both the physical and psychological conditions at work. And so overall, this means that when people aren't addressing things like training, work conditions, and people struggling with various organisational pressures, then these are the consequences. But I really want the listeners to know it's all good news. It's not bad news.
In what way is it good news? Please tell us more. Any stats examples are always welcome.
Yeah. And I think because there's confusion and like any new regulation that comes in statewide and then nationally, it's like, well, what happens? So perhaps if I just deal with some of the myth busters, because I think we need to do that. One that I'm hearing a lot of is, oh, does this mean now I can't really do any performance management? I'm just holding hands and just dealing with the language that's used to me, deadwood. And I can tell you now, unequivocally, definitely not. This is about getting peak performance from all staff. And the way to be doing that is through your good channels of performance reviews, very clear and direct feedback, and very clear around what's needing to improve, if anything, and what's the positive consequences of that. And so certainly this is not about saying just have soft skills and there's no measures. Everything is about measure. So that's a big myth buster I want to remove. And I think the good news is that this is now saying what a lot of organisations do naturally, that we've now got structures in place, guidance from regulators, really good resources now available to assist organisations to set up their businesses for even improved success. And so rather than seeing it as the big stick, I'd really like our business owners to see this as a really good, positive regulation that actually can be in the control of the business owner of setting up all those templates, all the training, and more importantly, the relationship with the staff that ensures a no risk and no harm environment. And you know, we want people to have innovation. We want people to think left field. And so it's important that they feel there's trust and they feel there's the support to do so. And that's the culture that sits behind the premise of this psychological safety guideline.
So from a business leader's perspective, why should psychological safety be a priority, apart from the fact that it's now regulation? For example, how does psychological safety impact performance or productivity or the bottom line?
And it really does. You're quite right. When you look at it, if you've got a psychologically unsafe workplace, then people are frightened to raise issues, frightened to raise about mistakes, things that are happening, or they just don't feel like they're being heard. So therefore they go underground, basically. And when that happens, then there's no improvements. And so therefore, from a systemic point of view or organisational point of view, nothing improves. But the converse happens, and that is people are then showing signs of psychological distress through the conditions or the circumstances within the workplace. And when you get that, there's, of course, the knock-on effect that happens of people having time off from work, attrition, people voting with their feet, and also you get ultimately for a number of people psychological burnout. And so you've then got a very unhealthy workplace. So if we flip it and say, in actual fact, this regulation or guideline, I like to call it more guideline than anything, actually allows people to enhance what works well and put that on steroids, basically, so that will actually improve performance and will improve productivity because people feel heard, people feel connected, people feel they belong, people feel they're valued. And then, the natural spin-off occurs then of a cohesive group that are all throwing ideas around in order to make things better or come out with creative solutions.
Are there anything else in terms of practical things leaders can do day to day to build psychological safety within teams? Where should business leaders start?
Yeah, it's a good one. Depends upon the size, of course, of the organisation. But if we start really small around just your team, then I'm seeing it very well done in the veterinary profession, very well done in the medical profession and the nursing profession, which is interesting. And things that they're doing is they have what the mining industry has done for so long. And that is, they call it different language, but a toolbox session where it might only be a 5-minute, 10-minute check-in of how's everyone, what's going on, what's on your plate, what are the things you need from each other in order, and I keep using this language, in order for you to be successful in your role. So it's not about just the business, it's about your success in being able to do your job. And so those quick, brief, stand up, it's not literal, although some do. Certainly the veterinary industry do that before roster, before they start their shift. And then what you're looking at is things like that. It could be a Teams meeting if you've got a scattered group virtually. It could be just a check-in by the team leader or the manager around just finding out where people are up to and where are the hurdles in order for them to be able to deliver on the outcomes that they're wanting to achieve. And so it's problem solving jointly. It's that two-way street of getting the feedback of what's not working and what is working. And it is actually really feeling that people can put their hand up and say, this is mucked up, this hasn't worked, or here's a mistake in either that language or what the language is for the culture. But basically fessing up to it and knowing that there's not going to be a really heavy hand to it. But if there are significant consequences to it, then it's worked out together what's going to be the resolution, rather than just throwing them to the den, the lion's den.
Yeah, look, and that sounds great. And it doesn't seem too hard to implement either. Are there any classic areas or ways that businesses can get this wrong on psychological safety? Perhaps if there are well-intentioned approaches that can actually undermine psychological safety that you'd like to warn about or share?
Yeah, I think inaction is actually the greatest danger, that people give the rhetoric to it and do nothing different. And I think, for me, that's the part that is really I'd like to say, because the whole thing of psychosocial risk is not new, but the tolerance for inaction is. And so therefore, there's really important to have good structures around your performance, around your goal setting, around people's KPIs, around people's psychological safety, and that's bedded into the KPIs. So it's not a standalone. It's part of every suite of KPIs needs to be looking at what are the objectives in each role, but also what are the things around it, from the individual's interpersonal skills and working style through to what's the organisational structures that are required that are going to support good psychological safety. And so they are giving that support, peer support. They are reducing the effect of harm in whatever that might be, aggressive behaviour, bullying, etc. And a really tricky thing that a lot of organisations have found is that, and this is a very generalised statement, but often those who are the highest performing can at times be unaware of their behaviour, of their interaction with others, because they are so focused. And it really is that support from the organisation to actually give them that information, to give them that feedback, because their success is based on a certain approach. And so therefore, don't let's throw the baby out with the bathwater, as I've heard a lot of people do, say, well, we can't keep them in the business. No, give them that opportunity of feedback and being able to manage that in a different way. And I mean, let's get real here. Some people do very well just working quite independently of others. So I know great organisations that what they've put in is a buffer between that individual and the rest of the team. That's an innovative solution. So, we don't have a unilateral and a single way of dealing with different personality styles in the workplace. But at the same time, we need to make sure that people feel safe and they feel that they can get up in the morning, they can go to work, and they feel comfortable and enjoyable within that environment. And that for me is the simple measure of your authenticity, your transparency, and really being true to who you are.
Look, that sounds terrific. And listening to this, I'm feeling really inspired. I'm sure other listeners are as well. So just briefly before I let you go, for a business owner or a manager listening now, what's one simple action they could take, say, this week to start improving psychological safety in their team?
To speak to individual staff members and say, what could we do together? It's a we, not an I. What can we do together to actually enhance our culture and the way we are working together to make this place a very safe, very psychologically supported workplace? That's it.
That was Rhonda Andrews, Managing Director and Senior Psychologist at Barrington Centre. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. Follow Business Essentials podcast across social media and head to businessessentialspodcast.au for more. Business Essentials is a Sound Cartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schellberger, Nicole Goodman and myself. Technical production is by Pete Letts. I'm Grace Jennings-Edquist. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Business Essentials next week.
Sound Cartel.